Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm David Brafman, Associate Curator of Rare Books at the Getty Research Institute and the curator of the Art of Alchemy exhibition. That's at the Getty Research Institute. So what you're going to listen today is a range of subjects going from Greco-Egyptian antiquity and the origins of alchemy to alchemy in the age of chemical reproduction, the birth of photography. And then we're going to sort of segregate it a little bit, really more because of a little commuting problem on the part of one of our speakers. And we'll look at Chinese Taoist alchemy and Indian Tantric alchemy last. I think it works out because alchemy in general is a pretty complex subject, so it's sort of nice to get the kind of range in the history of visual culture and art before we look at something that is not even generally incorporated into exhibitions or research on alchemy. I guess just a few quick remarks on the project and the exhibition. We from the beginning wanted to take this approach to the impact of alchemy on artistic practice and expression. You hear the word alchemy, you think turning lead into gold, when really at the core of alchemy was trying to unlock the nature of the secrets of creation. And what do I say in the blurb? And bend them to the will of an industrious human imagination. But I don't know about you guys, but I'm kind of sick of listening to myself talk at the lecture, and I really would like to get to our speakers. I'm going to say this about each one. Matteo Martelli is a dear, dear friend. It's really nice to see him again. He was born in Rimini, Italy. And you went to the Liceo Classico, Giulio Cesare? I didn't know that. Me too! Where he graduated in classics at the University in Bologna and received a PhD in classics in ancient Greek philology in 2007. That's my other advice, always work with people who have studied ancient Greek philology. Hi, Rihanna. He spent a year at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, and then he enrolled in a second PhD in the history of science at the University of Pisa. After that, had an Edelstein postdoc fellowship at Philadelphia, the Chemical Heritage Foundation, a wonderful research center. Then a postdoc research fellowship at Humboldt University in Berlin. And I'm going to skip to the bottom. You've done too much. In 2016, he moved to the Berlin-Brandenburgische Akademie der Wissenschaft as a research fellow. And what I learned last night was that Matteo has just been informed that he received the European Research Council grant, which in my mind, is just about the most prestigious grant in Europe. And damn, I'm jealous. No, it's wonderful. It's really an extraordinary thing and really well-deserved, and I want to congratulate you on it. This morning, Matteo is going to speak to us on the Greco-Egyptian origins of alchemy, chromatic transformations in the Byzantine and Syriac traditions. Please welcome Matteo Martelli. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you very much for this kind introduction, and thank you all for coming this morning. Okay, here is great. So, as many of you already know, the terms alchemy and chemistry share a common etymology. The word chemistry, as well as chemist, stem from the Latin words chimia, chimista, or chimicus, which were introduced in early modern technical literature by humanists such as Agricola. In the Art of Alchemy exhibition here, is it possible to see A copy of Agricola's masterpiece, De Re Metallica, on the nature of metals or of minerals, that is the first modern handbook on the art of mining, refining, and smelting minerals and metals. If one analyzes the different passages in which Agricola introduces the term chimia, chimista, and chimicus, it becomes pretty clear that the author meant those areas of expertise that in medieval Latin technical literature were referred to with the terms alchimia, alchimista, and alchimicus. And these terms are in turn the Latin words from which alchemy, alchemist, and alchemical derive. Agricola was the first model of a humanist, physician, and philosopher. He received a classical education at the University of Leipzig, where he later on became teacher of Greek and Latin. He also studied medicine in Italian universities such as Bologna, Venice, Padua, and Ferrara. This peculiar combination of a strong education in humanities and a certain interest for technology led Agricola to apply his knowledge of classical languages to his technical treatises. He always tried to use Latin expressions rather than vernacular technical terms in medieval Arabo-Latin terms. In an important paper from 1985, the historian of chemistry Alan Rock clearly spelled out the reasons behind Agricola's choice of introducing the term chimia. Agricola wanted to purify the spelling and clarify the etymology of the classical root of the Arabo-Greco-Latin word, alchimia. Basically, a linguistic and a philological approach led Agricola to recognize that the medieval term alchimia simply represented an attempt to Romanize the Arabic term alchimia or alchimia. Once the Arabic article al is left apart, the original term chimia clearly appears. The term chimia actually represents a Greek term already used in the alchemical writings composed in the Greco-Roman Egypt. The etymology of chimia is still debated among scholars who have proposed so far two main interpretations. The term must be understood as a proper Greek word stemming from the root kuo, that means melt, to melt, or the term might be an Egyptian loan word and refers to the local name of Egypt, Kemet in Middle Egyptian, or Kemi in Coptic. Leaving these etymological issues apart, we can follow Agricola's path and safely say that the very same etymology of the word chemia or alchemy points to the Greco-Egyptian origins of this art, origins that will be the focus of my paper today. Greco-Roman Egypt, in fact, is the place where usually scholars locate the emergence of alchemy. Between the 1st and the 4th century AD, many alchemical treatises were written in Greek by authors who used to live and work in Egypt. These books represent the earliest examples of alchemical writing in the so-called Western tradition. Some of these texts have been transmitted under the name of mythical figures, such as the Egyptian goddess Isis or the mythical Hermes Trismegistus. In the show, we do find wonderful representation of this mythical founder of alchemy. Yeah, actually we have one representation from late antiquity, and this is a very famous scroll attributed to Ripley. More generally, Hermes was considered a master of a universal knowledge, including cosmology, geometry, mathematics, and astronomy. According to the Greco-Egyptian alchemical authors, he also discovered the secrets of natural dyes and decided to inscribe this knowledge in the walls of Egyptian temples. Other Greco-Egyptian alchemical texts have been attributed to ancient wise men and philosophers such as Democritus. 4 books on dyeing are ascribed to the this early Greek philosopher, and these books originally covered 4 areas of expertise: the making of gold, the making of silver, then these basically include recipes to change the color of metals in yellow and white, the making of precious stones, and how to dye wool, or in general fabrics, purple. Finally, other texts have been transmitted under the name of real authors, of historical figures, such as the Greco-Egyptian alchemist Zosimus of Panopolis, 3rd, 4th century AD. According to the information preserved by the Byzantine tradition, we know that Zosimos was a philosopher from Alexandria, and he wrote alchemical writings addressed to Theosebeia. These books are arranged alphabetically in 28 books. Someone calls them keirokmeta, so handmade things. And he also wrote a life of Plato. Unfortunately, many of the treatises composed in the Greco-Roman Egypt went lost, and only a selection of alchemical texts have been preserved in later Byzantine manuscripts. These manuscripts, in fact, only preserve anthologies of alchemical writings where the early Greco-Egyptian material has been selected, summarized, and often excerpted. The most famous and ancient Byzantine manuscript that hand down this Greco-Egyptian material is the manuscript Marcianus Graecus 299. The codex is a parchment manuscript written in the so-called mixed minuscule, and on paleographical basis, it has been dated to the end of the 10th century AD, where it was probably copied in Byzantium. The manuscript is wonderfully decorated, as shown by this pulaire, or gate, actually in Greek, or also door, arcade, that encloses the title of the first treatise, a praxis, here, a lecture by Stephanus of Alexandria, where 7th century AD. The title is written in gold ink, and here you have 4 colors. I'm sorry for this black and white picture, but in any case, it's a very rich decoration. And actually, this rich decoration led scholars to suppose that the manuscript was written for a well-off client, probably the imperial library in Constantinople. The manuscript hands down a collection of alchemical text that is opened by some sort of introductory or explanatory text. Here we can read the title of this first page, actually, that is Sign of the Science of what is found in the technical writings of the philosophers, especially for that philosophy which they call secret. In fact, we have here a list of alchemical signs, and here we can see the 7 signs with the association between metals and planets. Basically, we have gold with sun, silver moon, lead Saturn, electrum, kind of gold-silver natural alloy, Jupiter, copper Venus, and tin Mercury. The use of similar signs and association will represent a hallmark of the whole alchemical tradition, as is nicely shown by different pieces displayed at the Getty at the exhibition, such as the frontispiece of the early modern treatise on the mounts of the 7 planets and metals by Michael Mayer. In the next sections, the manuscript Marcianus presents a pinax, a table of contents, basically. And we have 42 titles here. Among these titles, we do have also treatises attributed to Greco-Egyptian alchemists. Especially Zosimus, we have 3 titles by Zosimus. This one is 35 chapters on the divine and holy heart. Then we have chapters to Theodoros. And the last one is the most interesting for us, is a treatise on alchemical equipment, on alchemical instruments and ovens. Especially this section represents an important example of another quite central feature of Byzantine manuscripts on alchemy, namely the presence of drawing depicting alchemical equipment. A simple comparison between the images in the Byzantine manuscripts and similar images included in early modern alchemical literature may give us a sense of the continuity of the alchemical tradition. For instance, this is something that you can see at the exhibition. This is actually a table with alchemical equipment from a early modern French anonymous handbook, Le Traité de Chimie, basically the treatise of alchemy. Many doubts, however, this is another picture from the Marcianus manuscript. Many doubts, however, remain when one wants to interpret the Byzantine picture from a technical point of view. Ancient texts certainly provide some help in interpreting these pictures. If we focus on devices possibly used for distillation and sublimation, we do know that the ancients used similar technology and method to extract specific substances. For instance, they exploited the low melting point of mercury so that they could extract mercury by heating cinnabar, the natural ore of mercury. The Hellenistic pharmacologist Dioscorides, we are 1st century BCE and 1st century AD, describes the entire process as follows. Putting on a earthenware pan an iron spoon, basically containing cinnabar, they fit on it an ambix, is a vessel, luting it round with clay and then heat it on the coals. For the vapor adhering to the ambix, when scraped off and cooled, becomes mercury. This technique involved an apparatus composed by two vessels slotted into each other. An iron spoon containing cinnabar was put in the first vessel, made of clay, and this vessel was covered by another vessel called ambix. Taylor proposed this reconstruction where we can see actually the lower vessel and the upper vessel, that is the ambix, from which actually alembic comes in terms of etymology. Various scholars maintain that a similar apparatus was improved by ancient alchemists. They would have separated the lower and the upper vessels, connected these two vessels with a pipe, and added another tube with a digestion vessel. This one, actually. And this would have been a basic example of alembic, or of steel, of which we have many representations, actually, in the Marcianus manuscripts and in other Byzantine manuscripts. However, if several alchemical texts refer to similar devices, which might be interpreted as a kind of improvement of the instruments described by Dioscorides, we must admit that the new device was not used to process, to treat cinnabar, at least in the same way in which it is described by Dioscorides. Similar devices, in fact, seems to be more suitable for distilling liquid substances rather than for sublimating solid minerals like cinnabar. It is therefore difficult to understand which substances Greco-Egyptian alchemists used to produce by using devices such as the devices depicted in the manuscripts. A passage by the alchemist Zosimus can help us to better understand the use of this equipment. Basically, Zosimus writes, "The sulfur water will be wasted by those alchemists who did not understand, as I have written, how to distill by means of the vessel, lopas in Greek, and the tube, solen. It is our habit or custom to give the name of water to the vapor of native sulfur and of arsenic minerals. These references to lopas vessel and solen tube allow us to suppose that this passage describes sulfur water made through distillation. The term sulfurous waters, however, leads to some ambiguity. On the one hand, ancient alchemists like to play with the polysemy of the Greek word theion, that can mean both sulfur and divine. On the other hand, ancient Egyptian alchemists use both expressions to refer to a dying substance that was expected to transform base metals into gold and silver. ancient sources actually preserve a recipe for the preparation of the divine water or sulphurous water. This is the recipe. The recipe is actually preserved in one of the earliest alchemical treatises that we have. This is a papyrus, the so-called Leiden papyrus from the 4th century AD. And we can read a pretty clear recipe description. Oudatos theou euresis in Greek, so invention of the divine water. Mix 1 drachma of lime and the same quantity of sulfur that have been crumbled in a vessel containing strong vinegar or the urine of a virgin boy. The liquid is then burned by applying fire below, so as to make it like blood, so very actually red. Filter to remove sediment and employ it neat. Actually, we did try this recipe in a modern laboratory, and we actually prepare by mixing the two ingredients. We are here at the Johns Hopkins University, and the hand that you can see is by Professor Lawrence Principe, that is doing a lot of replications of ancient and early modern alchemical recipes. And we did actually produce this red liquid here, and when you dip a silver coin in this liquid, you do have a change of color in the silver. And so basically, you can make gold. On the other hand, we must note that the recipe preserved in the papyrus does not mention any distillation at all. The two ingredients, namely lime and sulfur, were simply mixed together in a liquid without being distilled. On the other hand, the above-mentioned passage by Zosimus certainly suggests that ancient alchemists tried to distill liquids such as sulfur waters. However, these procedures are neither clearly described in the sources, nor they have been yet at least tested in modern laboratories. Therefore, it remains very difficult to understand or to predict the possible results that can be achieved by distilling this kind of solutions or liquids. Especially the lack of primary sources make it difficult for modern readers to solve this kind of questions on alchemical equipment or more in general on ancient alchemy. However, a possible help to face similar problems is actually provided by the Oriental tradition. Greco-Egyptian alchemical texts, in fact, were soon translated into other languages, in particular in Syriac and Arabic. For the Arabic, we will hear actually Gabriele Ferrario speaking about the Arabic alchemy. For the Syriac, I would like just to show you a couple of manuscripts that preserve the Syriac translations of Greek alchemical texts. These translations were probably made by learned Eastern Christian scholars between the 6th and the 9th century AD. And Syriac is namely one of the dialects of the ancient Aramaic. You can see these are two manuscripts from actually kept in London at the British Library. They both date to the 16th century, so they are pretty recent, if you want, and they preserve the same collection of alchemical texts. The first part is in Syriac, and the second part is in Gershuni. The Gershuni is basically the Arabic language written with Syriac letters. In this case, the Syriac alphabet is Serto. Despite the late composition of these manuscripts, they seem to be copies of earlier collection of Syriac translations of Greek alchemical texts, which were probably composed between the 6th and the 9th century. The Syriac manuscripts present features that are clearly comparable with the Byzantine manuscripts. We have, for instance, list of alchemical signs, like in this actually volume. Here we can read, these are actually three kinds of symbols of sign for copper. In Syriac, this is nechsho, but here, you basically, if you read, this one is kulkus, that is just a Syriac transliteration of the Greek term for copper, that is kalkos. And also the kind of symbols of signs that we have are very similar to the signs that we already seen in the Byzantine manuscript. And here, I mean, you can see also something for onko actually in Syriac, cassiterin, that is again the transliteration of cassiteron in Greek, that is another metal, tin. Actually, another important Syriac manuscript is a manuscript kept in the Cambridge University Library. It's a manuscript dating to the 15th century. The shell mark is MM629. And this manuscript is particularly important because it preserves a selection of Syriac translation of let's say, the original Greek books by the alchemist Zosimus of Panopoli. We already mentioned it. And we have here 15 books by him, each one introduced by a letter of the Syriac alphabet. You can see here the book on the making of copper, letter Vav. Here the book on the making of tin, of the working of tin, letter Het. And this kind of structure of order basically mirrors the original order, the original structure of Zosimus' text better than the chapters and the, let's say, selection that is preserved by the Byzantine tradition. In the last part of my talk, I would like to focus especially on this text because the beginning of this book actually preserves a very intriguing, let's say, narrative on the origins of alchemy. And we're going to read some section of this account, basically, that, in my opinion, is particularly meaningful for two reasons. First of all, we have in this account the first occurrence of the term chimia, as we already seen, is at the basis of the same word, alchemy. And we will see that when Zosimus discusses about this term, actually gives very nice, let's say, elements about the definition of alchemy in antiquity. The second important point is actually this mythological framework in which the plot of the story is set, because, as we will see, the myth is very similar to the so-called myth of the fallen angels, that is a biblical, actually, story told in this book of the Watchers, that is an apocryphal book attributed to the prophet Enoch, the grandfather of Noah. Let's start reading, actually, the passage by Zosimus preserved in this book on the working of tin. The Holy Scriptures say, my lady, that there is a race of demons that has intercourse with the women and has authority over them. Hermes also mentions this in his Physica, a book on nature. In this way, in fact, the ancient and holy books say that some angels fell in love with women, came down, and taught them about all the works of nature. For this reason, as the book says, those who became arrogant remain outside heaven, because they taught mankind all the malicious arts which do not benefit the soul at all. The books claim that the works of nature start up from them, and theirs is the first exposition concerning these arts. They call these books Kumu, whence alchemy, Chymia, that takes its name. It's clear that books play a pivotal role in this section of Zosimus' account. Zosimus refers to books, ktabe in Syriac, when he spells out the sources of his narrative on the origins of alchemy. He refers to the Holy Scriptures, which are to be identified with the ancient apocryphal text of Enoch. Then Zosimus mentions an Hermetic work under the title Physica, in which a similar account was included. We will discuss very soon about this Hermetic text. Finally, Zosimus speaks of a book on alchemy when he described the actual form in which the fallen angels revealed their knowledge to mankind. From this book, Zosimus continues, the same art of alchemy took his name. We should wonder at this point which kind of contents did such an original, a powerful book on alchemy include? The passage does not enter into details, but we can safely infer further information from the holy books of Enoch that Zosimus mentioned as a source. Actually, we do have a copy of the Book of Enoch, especially this Book of the Watchers. This was a very widespread and popular book in late antiquity, and it has been preserved, I think, in at least 5 different languages. We have part of the original Aramaic book, actually discovered in these Dead Sea Scrolls in Palestine and in Israel now. And we have Greek translations, Syriac translation. We will see an Ethiopic translation of this text. So they were very popular, basically. And this section speaks about the revelation of one of the fallen angels, basically Azazel. Azazel, the 10th of the leaders, taught mankind to make swords and armor and every instrument of war, and how to work metals of the earth and gold, and how to make them into adornments and how to work silver. He showed them also to use the use of cosmetics and beautifying the face and choice stones and coloring tinctures. Several arts, in Greek technai, listed in this text, could have sounded particularly familiar to ancient alchemists, who often dealt with similar topics in their writings. As already seen, the 4 alchemical books ascribed to Democritus included a section on a wide spectrum of techniques, such as the making of gold, the making of silver, the making of gemstones. This last area of expertise was surely linked to the production of colorful glasses, as beautifully shown at the exposition at the Getty. Synthetically colored glasses, in fact, were used to imitate gemstones, such as this piece of artificial agate, actually dating from the 1st century AD, testifies. All the technical skills listed in the passage by Enoch, Book of the Watchers, might explain why Zosimus decided to use this Enochian framework for his narrative on the origins of alchemy. He probably recognized an evident similarity between the areas of expertise revealed by the fallen angels and the contents of alchemical books. Such a connection is also explicitly stated in a later version of Enoch's Book of the Watcher. In fact, in a manuscript preserving a translation of this text into Ethiopic, we can read the term alchemy written at the margin of the passage on the fallen angel Azazel. On the other hand, next to the tradition of Enoch, Zosimus refers to a book of Hermes, this Physica, on nature. This is likely to represent an earlier alchemical text about which, unfortunately, we don't have sure information. However, a similar account on the origins of alchemy is certainly preserved in a 1st century alchemical book ascribed to the Egyptian goddess Isis. We can read the beginning of this text by Isis, or attributed to Isis, of course. O son, I went to Hormanutis, we don't know which place, it should be an Egyptian place, a sanctuary of the holy art in Egypt, where I spent a long time. According to the recession of the convenient time and to the necessary course of the spherical movement, one of the angels living in the 1st firmament looked at me from above and came with the wish of having sex with me. When he arrived and acted accordingly, I did not give myself because I wanted to learn the preparation of gold and silver. In Greek, actually, to kruzoukai erguro kataskoué, so the making of gold and silver. Thanks to the information preserved by later alchemical authors, we know that Zosimus used to attribute this Isis alchemical treatise to Hermes. A similar overlap between Hermes and Isis is not surprising at all, especially if we consider the so-called Corpus Hermeticum, where actually we have philosophical treatises attributed to Hermes, along with philosophical dialogues between Isis and her son, Horus. Therefore, we cannot exclude that Zosimus has in mind books like this one when he mentioned the Physica of Hermes. in his account on the origins of alchemy. This book, however, mentions only the making of gold and silver among the skills revealed by the angels. In this Hermetic version of the Enochian myth, the angelic revelation seems to include a narrow spectrum of arts, especially if compared with the fourfold division of alchemy that we already discussed in Pseudo-Democritus' 4 books. A broader spectrum of skills and techniques is clearly mentioned also in the Book of the Watcher, which, as already seen, must be identified with one of the sources of Zosimus' account. To sum up, already in the earliest phases of the Greco-Egyptian alchemy, it seems possible to detect different ideas about the areas of expertise that the alchemical art was supposed to include. The making of gold, or chrysopoeia in Greek, which represent one of the hallmarks of the Western alchemical tradition, is certainly discussed in our earliest example of alchemical treatises, and this identification of alchemy with the making of gold will become widespread in the Byzantine tradition. However, whereas Byzantine scholars and practitioners were particularly interested in the making of gold and silver, the earlier alchemical texts discussed above clearly point to a different idea of alchemy, which included a wider spectrum of techniques. However, even within this broader and probably earlier definition of alchemy, some variations are clearly detectable. The Book of the Watchers organizes the spectrum of the arts revealed by the fallen angels around the very central idea of dyeing, of changing the color of different substances. The same idea seems to play a central role in Pseudo-Democritus' 4 books, which did not focus only on metallic transmutation, but also dealt with gemstones and purple. Zosimos of Panopolis clearly refers to the Enochian tradition and to the Book of the Watchers in his mythological account on the revelation of the first books of alchemy. However, after mentioning this first book of alchemy, Zosimus continues his narrative and describes the way in which this book, and more generally, the alchemical art, has been transmitted over centuries. And this is the last text we're going to read. This is actually the section that follows after the account on the fallen angels in the book of the Tin, or in Zosimus' book on the working of the Tin. You must know, my lady, that those who wrote short versions of the book of alchemy said that just silver can be dyed gold. But the book of alchemy they have hidden, so the original book of alchemy, assured that lead and tin and iron and silver take the color of gold. Each metal takes the color of the other one, and again, every metal takes the color of silver, every metal the color of copper, every metal the color of iron. Lead produces tin, copper, iron, silver, gold. In the same way, tin produces the same metals as well, and again from the beginning to the end, and from the end to the beginning. Zosimus seems to take for granted that alchemy was related to a plurality of dyeing techniques. The proper alchemist, Zosimus claims, was expected to put into practice any possible transformation of color without focusing only on gold making. Nevertheless, the Egyptian alchemist never mentions stones working or purple. This kind of craft seems to have somehow left apart within the debate on the contents of the original books of alchemy. Even though Zosimus stresses the central role played by dyeing techniques, the polarity between a wider idea of alchemy and the making of precious metals seems to have been reduced to a discussion on metalworking. Zosimus underscores all the possible chromatic transformations of metals, which seems to become the most relevant topic for any alchemical inquiry. Such a variety of positions already detectable during the earliest phases of the Western alchemical traditions make clear how fluid were the boundaries of an art primarily focusing on chromatic transformations. A simple focus on the practice of chrysopoeia does not seem to be sufficient for getting a full understanding of the different historical evolutions of alchemy. Alchemy must be identified with a complex art, whose exact definition was debated among the authors usually considered as the founders of this discipline. And only a deep investigation of their treatises, many of which still waiting for editions and translations, will provide us with new and fresh material for building a more complete picture of the different technical aspects that were encapsulated in the enigmatic word chimia. Thank you very much.
When you showed the Book of Watchers, adapted from Enoch, Dead Sea Scrolls, and there was a section about coloring tinctures. They taught women the coloring tinctures. And the Greek, when it's in Greek, it's like bathika, right? Like bathing it, right? Do they make any explicit connection to like the Greek verb baptizo, like baptizing, like the spiritual aspect of purifying, transforming this substance?
Thank you. This is a tricky question, but it's a very important point, actually. Yeah, in Greek, basically, we use the same verb to say to die and to baptize, actually. It's baptizo or bapto, basically. And I think that there is a connection with, at some point, some of the Greco-Egyptian texts were Christianized actually in the course of the tradition. And we have, for instance, there are a few scholars that try to investigate the connection between some of the Coptic Gospels that have been preserved, these apocryphal Gospels, where this idea of dying is actually strictly related to actually baptized, and the alchemical text. And I think that there is a connection. In that case, in the case of the Book of Watchers, we have, in the Greek translation, we have just tabaphika, as you mentioned. And it could actually, I think it refers to any kind of dyeing techniques, actually. Cosmetics, as well as painting, and so on. So it has a more technical sense, I think, in that specific passage.
I have a question about tin, since it was such a part of your presentation. And first, I was curious if you could comment on its planetary association and why it was chosen with a particular planet. And second, if you could unpack a little bit the slide where you mentioned that tin was associated with the letter Heth,
exactly.
Which is a Hebrew letter. If you could explain a little bit the connection, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thank you. So it's a difficult question because the association between planets and metals are very fluid at this stage. So basically, I don't have any clear explanation why actually tin, I think, is associated with, sorry, I have to go back to, I don't remember which one, maybe I can have a look at with Jupiter, okay, perfect. So, and this is, actually, there is, I don't have any explanation for this point. Why this, I mean, it's very clear, sun and moon, but for tin is, here, actually, in this is a good point, actually, that tin is mercury. I think at some point, tin was actually identified with mercury, in the sense that they are very similar, especially melted tin and mercury can be somehow confused with each other. But in this list, we have a different kind of criterion of classification. This is not just for tin, but for each mineral and metals. We have first the name of the metal, and then different kind of byproducts of these metals. And what is interesting here is especially the attempt of, building up a kind of technical terminology in Syriac, and so we have this attempt to translate a simple transliteration of the Greek term into Syriac. The association with the letter Heth, that in that case is not is Syriac, but the alphabet is the same, actually, I think is there are probably symbols behind this association. We know, for instance, the only text that is preserved in Greek about this association is about letter omega. And actually, at the beginning, Zosimus explained how the shape of these letters has a particular and meaningful, let's say, symbolic meaning. For the letter heth, I think, actually, we should think about, this is a translation into Syriac of a Greek alchemical text. So heth is actually something that should correspond to an original Greek letters. And for this, probably eta in this case, but we don't have any explanation by Zosimus why he put this association. So there is no explicit reference to why tin and heta. There is basically no etymological connection because cassiteros in Greek. So basically, it's not clear.
Earlier there was mention about
Excuse me, sir.
oh, sorry. Earlier there was mention about the seducers of the earth women for trading information on gold.
Yeah.
Is that something that we can connect with the Nephilim from the scriptures?
Yeah, this is the usual. This is actually the explanation why all this Enochian tradition at some point was produced is because there is this connection with the biblical passage.
A follow-up would be the Nephilim were actually conducting some initiations that would be passed on through the occult arts in human history.
I mean, this is a difficult. I mean, because what is I think behind the account of Zosimus in this case there is a Gnostic background. What is interesting is that basically Zosimus identifies these Nephilim, these angels, with demons. So there is a different perspectives for the alchemist, and because in his opinion, basically the alchemical arts is a revelation by demons that try to hide this art in exchange of sacrifices. And why Zosimus writes his own alchemical text? Because he wants to make this art available to everybody so they can basically avoid sacrificing to demons and learn the alchemical art by reading the books. There is a very peculiar combination in the Zosimus text between this Jewish background, a strong emphasis on a kind of written philosophical traditions. That's why the central role of books, and on the other hand, this Gnostic mythological framework that is a kind of big recipient where it can mix the different cultural influences.
Okay, so basically the Nephilim were stuck in the metaphysical as opposed to the spiritual.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
At the end of the day, we'll have a little round table, but now you know why he received a European Research Council grant. Thank you, Matteo. It's absolutely brilliant. Our next speaker, Gabriele Ferrario. The last time I invited him to speak here at the Getty, I gave an introduction of him and then picked up the bio afterwards, and I accidentally picked up his entire speech and took it away with me and shuffled all the pages. But so I promise, that's why he's holding on to it tightly today. Matteo would be jealous if I said that you're an even dear. Gabriele is a research associate at the Geniza Research Unit in Cambridge. He started in 2010, where he's been working on the description of Judeo-Arabic and Hebrew fragments. His particular interest, and he keeps trying to sneak it in at work, is to work on like alchemical fragments that he comes across, medical, scientific, magical material. He's trying to complete a catalog of the medical manuscripts in the Geniza collection at Cambridge. He graduated in Oriental Languages from Venice University Ca' Foscari in 2003. God, you're young. And you've only done one PhD? He completed his PhD at Ca' Foscari in 2007, where he produced a critical edition and translation of the Arabic and Hebrew versions of the alchemical treatise Liber de Aluminibus et Salibus, Book of Alums and Salts, which he's working on revising for publication now. He's been a fellow at the Warburg Institute, the Chemical Heritage Foundation in Philadelphia, and is one of the consultants for the Schoenberg database of medieval manuscripts, and he's collaborating with the Library of Congress's World Digital Library Project. If I listed all of his articles, again, we would be here for too long, so I am just going to say that today he's speaking to us on Sana'at el-Iksir, the art of the elixir. Alchemical ideas and practices in the Arabo-Islamic world. Please welcome a great friend, Gabriele A Ferrari.
Thank you very much, David, for this very kind introduction. Just one personal note. I met David in 2008 in El Escorial, close to Madrid, in Spain, and we bonded immediately over cigarettes. And we started talking about alchemy, and he was starting to figure out the idea for a show on the art of alchemy. And here we are, like 8-9 years afterwards, still talking about alchemy, still smoking as well. So, yeah. Okay, so towards the end of the 10th century, Abul Faraj Muhammad ibn Isaac al-Nadim was a successful bookseller, book collector, and scholar in Baghdad. He set an ambitious goal for himself. He decided to compile an index of the books of all the nations, Arabs and non-Arabs, which were extant in Arabic script on every branch of knowledge. This was conducted on the basis of all the books he owned personally or he had seen during his life of commerce. He called this work Al-Fihrist, the index, and after 1,000 years, nowadays, this work is still a valuable source of data, questions, and discussions for modern scholars. Al-Nadim devotes the 10th chapter of his index to alchemy and the alchemists, and provides a narration of the first contact of the Arabs with this art. He writes, and I quote, "The man who became concerned about the issuing of ancient books about the art of alchemy was Khalid ibn Yazid ibn Muawiyah. He was an orator, a poet, a master of literary style, as well as a man with a comprehensive interest. He was the first one for whom books of medicine and the stars and also books on alchemy were translated. He was a generous man, for when someone said to him, 'You have spent most of your energy seeking the art of alchemy,' Khalid replied, 'I have researched that only for the reason of enriching my friends and my brothers. Since I've coveted the caliphate but was unsuccessful, now I have no alternative than attaining the culmination of the art, so that anyone who once has known me one day, or whom I have known, will not need to stand at the gates of the sultans petitioning or being afraid.' And it is said, and God knows more, that the art of alchemy was verified by him, and that he wrote a number of books and epistles." So who was this Khalid? Khalid ibn Yazid ibn Muawiyah was the son of the Umayyad Caliph Yazid I, who was in power until 683. And note that this is a very early date. It's just like 50 years after the death of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. Khalid was too young to inherit the caliphate at that stage, so it went on to other descendants. But he was deprived or freed from the pain of leading the Islamic community, and it appears that Khalid devoted his life to research of both Islamic and foreign sciences. So how was he introduced to alchemy? Which, this question, from our point of view, also corresponds to how did the Arabs accounted for the introduction of the foreign science of alchemy in their intellectual world. So the story continues in Al-Nadim, and I quote, "While Khalid was relaxing in Damascus, a man called Ghalib came to him, and since he knew that Khalid was interested in alchemy, reported the fact that he met a very knowledgeable monk. This monk was called Morianus, or Marianus, and lived in isolation outside Jerusalem. Khalid sent him off, Ghalib, to find the monk. Once they found him, they brought him to Khalid, who saw that he was in a very bad state, with a torn leather coat, and offered him to bring him to Damascus and to give him a place in a monastery. So Khalid was visiting this monk every day, and they were discussing the art of alchemy and other intellectual issues. Ghalib recorded in written form the dialogues between Khalid and Morienus. So this is the end of the quote. The written record of this very alchemical dialogue between Khalid and the monk Morienus, it's very difficult to date. Its dating is very problematic, but its importance is double-folded. The teachings of Morienus appear to be at the very origin of the interest in Greek sciences among the Arabs, and also these teachings are the very first alchemical text that enters the medieval Latin world. So these dialogues between Khalid and Morienus are at the origin of Arabic alchemy, but also these are the first that enter the Latin tradition. In fact, on the 11th of February, 1144, Robert of Chester, an Englishman residing in Toledo in Spain, finished his translation of this very same work with the Arabic title, with the Latin title, Liber de Compositione Alchimiae. This is the first alchemical book to reach the Latin world. As in many other cases, the narration of Al-Nadim, we go back to the Arabic source, must be critically assessed, since it presents some anachronisms that are difficult to reconcile with what we know from other historians, in particular regarding the dating of the first translation of scientific works from Greek and Syriac into Arabic. As Matteo has recently discussed in an Italian article, Al-Nadim's narration fits with what we know regarding the atmosphere of cultural exchange that was between Greek, Syriac, and Arabic elements in 7th century Damascus. Altogether, it appears plausible that an initial penetration of Greek scientific ideas in the Arabic world could have happened already under the Umayyad caliphs, thanks to the private initiative of wealthy and inquisitive members of the elite, like Khalid, almost a caliph. This enterprise would become institutionally driven and amazingly productive under the Abbasids, so with the next dynasty, in the 8th and 9th centuries. The introduction of alchemy to the Arab-Islamic world led to some crucial changes and expansion in the alchemical doctrine. The first and most noticeable pertains to the name of this discipline itself. To the Greek humeia, the Arabic definite article al was indelibly attached, forming alchimia. Then that became the Latin alchimia, alchemia, archemia. It must be noted, though, that in Arabic, the meaning of alchemia does not correspond to the meaning of the English alchemy. At least for all the medieval period, alchemia doesn't define a doctrine, but a substance. The coveted elixir or stone of the philosopher, the perfecting agent that once projected over base metal would produce the transmutation into noble ones, gold and silver. In the medieval Arabic world, alchemy was called ilm alchemia, the science of the chemia, the science of the elixir, or also ilm sinaati alchemia, or ilm sinaati elixir, so the science of the making of the chemia, or the making of the elixir, or more simply al-sina, the making, with a clear lexical connection to its practical and operative aspects. The Arabic verb sana conveys a strong practical and operative meaning. It's like the verb poiein in Greek. This is also mirrored, this practical focus is mirrored also by another common way of defining alchemy in the Middle Ages in Arabic as al-amal al-azm, so the great work, the great art, always with a lexical reference to its operative nature. By the end of the 10th century, as the account given by Al-Nadin in his Fihrist clearly shows, the Greek and Byzantine alchemical heritage has been assimilated in and well digested by the Arabic Islamic culture. The numerous translations of Greek alchemical texts appeared between the 8th and 9th century are now paired up around the 10th century, even a bit before, by an extensive number of commentaries and a flourish of original Arabic alchemical works, an extremely rich production that I regret to say is still largely unknown to modern scholarship. Manuscript collections, in particular in the Middle East, but not only in the Middle East, are often uncatalogued or poorly catalogued. Editions or crucial alchemical works are scarce, even nowadays, and in many cases, when we have editions, they are philologically unreliable. Translations in Western languages of these works are few and far between, and also few and far between are scholars that work on this topic. We can count them on the fingers of one hand and a half, more or less. So, in what follows, I will try and outline some of the key theoretical tenets and practical endeavors of medieval Muslim alchemists. I will try to do this by looking in detail at a couple of pages from one of the objects on display in the Art of Alchemy show. I'm talking about the Arabic Manuscript 29 of the Biomedical Science Library at UCLA. Among the impressive objects on show, at the Art of Alchemy show, this manuscript may be one of the least conspicuous items. It may not catch the eye as much as the replay scroll, of course. But yet, its contents are very interesting. My task here today was made kind of simpler by a very wise choice of opening. Folios 72 and 73, rector of this work, are extremely rich in alchemical themes. And I must praise David for having chosen this opening that makes my life easy today. The manuscript on paper, this is on paper, and it's a bit late. It dates from the 18th century, and it's written in a very clear script. It preserves a miscellaneous collection of short alchemical treatises of medieval origin, most of which are attributed to or rely heavily on Jabir ibn Hayyan and the alchemical doctrines that are linked to his environment. The historicity of the figure of Jabir ibn Hayyan was already put under scrutiny by Muslim scholars as early as the 11th century. And it has been discussed until nowadays in what can be defined as a sort of Homeric question of medieval Arabic alchemy. It seems now plausible that an actual figure of an alchemist called Jabir was acting from the second half of the 8th century. But after his death, the number of his original writings starts to multiply, with the inclusion of pseudepigraphical works penned by members of his circles, his disciples, and later followers of his doctrine. So the corpus became enormous, as you can see. 70 books, 112 books, 10 books, and further books. So an enormous amount of works, only partially belonging to the original Jabir, and it's very difficult to discern now which were the doctrines of the original Jabir and what can be called Jabirian. But for our purpose today, we can comfortably talk about the Jabirian corpus in general, encompassing original and spurious works by Jabir, to which also the treatises preserved in the UCLA manuscript belong. Under the title, this is still the UCLA manuscript, is Min Kitab al-Nur li Jabir, from Jabir's Book of the Light, we have here preserved the book number 11 of the 112 books, a major collection of Jabirian works, together with the other that were in the previous slide, the books of the 70 books, the books of mercy, and the books of the balance. The text on this page alludes to one of the main theoretical tenets of Jabirian alchemy, the so-called mercury-sulfur theory. Not exclusively alchemical in itself, the mercury-sulfur theory derives from a modified version of the Aristotelian physical theory of the exhalations. It is found in the first book of the Meteorological. This was mediated into Arabic by the Kitab Sir al-Khalika, so the Book of the Secrets of Creation, by the pseudo-Apollonius of Tyana. This is a fundamental theoretical assumption that underlies most of the alchemical production of the Arabic Middle Ages. In our manuscript here, this theory, the sulfur-mercury theory, is only hinted at, but not really discussed. And for explaining it, I would like to use a passage from a work that shares the same intellectual background as the Jabirian corpus, the Epistles of the Brethren of Purity. These epistles are actually a universal encyclopedia composed in Basra, in Iraq, around the times of Jabir, by a group of intellectuals of Shi'i inclinations. The 19th epistle of this Brethren of Purity describes the formation of metals in the caves according to the mercury-sulfur theory in a very linear way, so they're very useful for me today. I would like to present now my translation of this part in a sort of weird animation that I've tried to prepare. So imagine that this is sort of the edge of a cave, so here we are underground, and this is above ground. Okay. So this is the translation. It goes like this. You have to know, my brother, that when the heat of the mine touches those humid particles that are suffocated in the earth and touches the vapors that are imprisoned in it, they melt, they become thin and light, and they slowly rise towards the ceilings of those caves. They stop there for a while. During summer, when the inner parts of the cave cool, humid particles and vapors freeze, become dense, and they slowly move back to the bottom of those abysses and those caves. They become drops and they mix with earth and clay of that place. They remain there for a while. The temperature in the cave keeps on cooking them and making them mature. The length of the permanence in the caves purifies them and makes them heavier and denser. Because of their earthly contents, their thickness and their density, the humid particles become trembling mercury. On the other hand, the aerial and oily particles, together with the earthly parts that join them, through cooking process and after a long time, become combustible sulfur. When these mercurial and sulfuric parts mix themselves for a second time, if the heat remains stable during their concoction, they combine and form the different varieties of metals. For example, if mercury is pure, sulfur is pure, and the parts, when they're mixed together, are in the best proportion, if the sulfuric particle absorbs mercury's humidity, and if the humidity of mercury dries up, and if the heat of the cave remains stable during their cooking and their maturation, and finally, if no cold or dry accident happens to interfere with them before their maturation, if all this happens, so many different conditions, if all of these conditions are fulfilled through this process, and after a long time, pure gold will be produced. And then, if a cold accident happens to interfere with the process before the maturation, white silver will be produced. If a dryness caused by an excess of heat or of earthly particles interferes, dry red copper will be produced, and so on. So then the text lists all the possible accidents and all the possible metals that are produced when these accidents intervene in their maturation in the caves. So, and it goes on. According to this pattern, mineral substances deviate from the best equilibrium and the best proportion because of accidental and external causes. That is, because of excess or lack of sulfur or mercury, because of excess of or lack of heat, because of the intervention of cold accident before their maturation, and because of their diverging from the right proportion. The mineral earthly substances are ruled according to this model. So this is an explanation of how metals are formed in caves. This is the theoretical basis that allows alchemical operations. Being all metals made up of mercury and sulfur in varying proportions, the alchemy has reached a complete understanding of nature, who is the true philosopher, as the quotation of Arrasi said in yesterday night's presentation. So the alchemists who have reached a complete understanding of nature can operate on base metals by reintegrating and rebalancing the sulfuric or mercurial constituents, by adding and subtracting coldness, hotness, humidity, and dryness in order to re-establish the perfect and harmonic proportion between these two basic constituents and finally obtain gold. But to make these things a bit more complex, according to Jabirian alchemy, every metal has two external, apparent quality, zahir, and two internal, concealed ones, batin. So this quality can take different degrees, so that a metal could be externally hot to the 3rd degree and dry to the 4th degree, and internally cold to the 4th degree and moist to the 3rd degree. The Jabirian corpus, and in particular the books of the balance, devise a very complex set of numerical and lexical tools for the alchemist to be able to understand the qualitative nature of the metals he wants to operate the transmutation upon. The basic assumption of this theory maintains the existence of a numerical harmony in the bodies. This harmony is in relationship with the stars, with music, and with language. The Arabic language, in particular, being the divine language through which God created the world, is trusted to correspond to and to mirror the ontological nature of all things created, and so also of metals. Jabir assumes that the analysis of the letters of the name of a particular metal can reveal the proportion of the nature that compose it. In order to analyze names in this sense, the letters of the Arabic alphabet are arranged not alphabetically, but according to the so-called abjad, a system that roughly replicates the disposition of the Hebrew alphabet, and it is often used with magical or cryptographic purposes in Arabic treatises of this period. Each letter of the Arabic language is coupled with one of the qualities in the following order. Alif corresponds to warm, to hot, Ba, cold, Jim, dry, Dal, humid, and so on, with repetitions, with 7 repetitions of all the qualities. These 7 groups of letters are put in relation with the 7 planets which are believed to exercise their influence on the final shape and nature of the body. The grade of the nature in the composition of the body will then vary according to the presence in its name of letters of the first group, the second, the third, or the fourth group, and so on until the 7th. Moreover, the place of any single letter in the name of a body influences the value of the quality that is related to it. The first letter of the name of a metal has its nominal value according to this scheme, but the second has 3 times its value, and the third 5 times, and the fourth 8 times. Jabir insists on this kind of proportion. This is 1, 3, 5, 8, with the sum of the natures of the perfect body being 17. The Jabirian books of the balance states that the sum of the different natures of one body represents its external qualities, while the difference between that sum and the number 17 represents its internal qualities. It's a very complex system for analyzing the chemical analysis of metals based on the name, the Arabic name of those metals, and according to this complex scheme of proportions and relationship between numbers and qualities. Instrumental to the alchemist's goal is the production of a stone, hajar, or elixir, a universal pharmacle that once thrown upon or projected onto a base metal will perform the transmutation by rebalancing and perfecting the quality of the metal to transmute, and by rendering it noble gold or silver. This stone or elixir has been called with many names along the history of Arabic, Latin, and vernacular alchemy. The philosopher's stone, the stone of the sages, the elixir, the Latin fermentum, menstruum, the quintessentia. In the UCLA manuscript, Jabir himself, by promoting a definition that is already found in Greek writings, insists on the special nature of this stone. So we are here, we are at the opening of folio 22. So this passage here, which I have also translation, this stone, so the stone that you use for rebalancing the metals and turning them into noble ones, is divided in 2 parts, in 2 forms, and in 2 shapes. Of these 2, one is spiritual, and the other one is bodily, is physical, because some of its parts are coagulated and some are dissolved. It is a stone, and it is not a stone. Further down in the same page of this manuscript, we find the mention of 2 crucial names of authorities for the whole history of alchemy: Hermes and Maria. Matteo has already talked about Hermes, so we'll move to the second authority, Maria. Maria, called also Maria Judea, or Maria the prophetess, or Maria the Jewess, or the Jewish, Her name and her importance in alchemy has left traces in a contemporary cooking technique, for instance, the Balneum Maria or Ben Marie or Bagno Maria in Italian. So her name keeps on being famous nowadays, and this is the very origin of the history of alchemy. Original works by these early alchemists are lost to us, but her importance is strongly stated in the Greek and Arabic extant writing of Zosimus, who considers Maria his teacher and the one who passed on to him all the secrets of alchemical knowledge. The fact that Zosimus attributes to a member of the Jewish community of Egypt such a key role in the development of alchemical knowledge will strongly influence in the centuries to come the opinion regarding the preeminence of the Jewish people in the science of alchemy. Through the centuries, Greek, Muslim, and Christian alchemists, and also historians later on, have looked at the Jewish people as particularly well-versed in alchemy, as like the depositories of some special secrets that other people couldn't really understand. Even detractors of alchemy, who consider the claims of this art as completely fraudulent, often pointed at the Jewish people for its origin. Just an example, we are moving a little bit further up in time. The philosopher and geographer Cornelius Franciscus de Pau was Dutch. In his essay on Chinese and Egyptian peoples, and he thought that alchemy was basically a fraud, he says, the majority of the Jews of Egypt had been ruined during the reign of Cleopatra, who hated the colony of monopolists and loan sharks that came from Palestine during the early Ptolemaic period. During this time of distress, some of those poor persons fell, because of their despair, in an outrageous form of devotion and in unbearable fanaticism. And so I believe that those visionaries were the first who imagined the gross fable regarding the transmutation of metals and attributing its secrets to a Jewish woman, this Maria, the one that is also mentioned in the UCLA manuscript. So the opinion of De Pau is very rough, but his arguments actually have some very ancient possible sources. If we take a look at this, this is just a list of sources that mention the Jewish people as particularly versed in alchemy, as the originator of this art or the retainers of these secrets. For instance, the biblical figure of Moses, and the fact that he melted the golden calf and had the Israelites drink from it, was seen by later alchemists as a mention of the so-called aurum potabile, the drinkable gold, which is very important in later Latin alchemy. I won't go through all of them, but for instance, Vincent of Beauvais, which is a 13th century encyclopedist, says that Adam was actually the first alchemist. Ben Jonson, which is a playwright, he wrote the Alchemist in the 17th century. He goes in a passage, says, I'll show you a book where Moses and his sister, which is still our Mary, Maria Judea, the one that was in a UCLA manuscript, and Solomon have written of the art of alchemy, and a treatise penned by Adam. So there are references in many cases, also starting from the early Greek works that Matteo have been talking about the preeminence of the Jewish people in alchemy. This is not a shared opinion by all scholars. Later on, with the beginning of the movement of the Hashkalah, the Jewish Enlightenment, many scholars tried to detach the Jewish people from anything that was not in line with the enlightened reason. And Steinschneider was a great scholar, great cataloger of Hebrew manuscripts, expresses his opinion regarding the connections between the Jewish people and alchemy, and is completely in the opposite direction compared to what we have read before. He says that there is no evidence regarding the involvement of the Jews in alchemy, although the alchemists used to date back their pseudepigraphical writings to Moses and his sister, Maria. The Jews understood so well the real scales for gold to be fooled by the philosopher's stone. So if we take a survey of the extant alchemical manuscripts in Arabic and Hebrew that are survived to nowadays, it seems to be clear and almost surprising that there is a lack of original medieval alchemical books composed by Jewish authors. So, if the Jewish people were so much involved and well-versed in alchemy, as Zosimus says, and the other sources say, how comes we don't have original Hebrew or Judeo-Arabic works that have survived to us? Scholars so recently have pointed out that there is a lack of sources in this field, and in a way they have suspended their judgment or inclined to argue that there has never been a real interest in alchemy among the Jews. Nevertheless, my recent researches in the hoard of 200,000 fragments manuscripts retrieved from the storage room, the Geniza of the Ben Ezra synagogue in Old Cairo, has allowed me to identify a corpus of around 150 alchemical fragments written in Judeo-Arabic, which is Arabic language written in Hebrew letters. There was the language that Jewish people used to write in when living in Arabic-speaking lands during the Middle Ages and later on. So this text, these 150 more or less alchemical fragments, are datable to from the 10th to the 13th century, and they were stored in this synagogue because according to Jewish law, you cannot really throw away the name of God when it's written down. So you store it in a Geniza, and then ideally after 7 years you bury those pieces of paper and vellum. But the Ben Ezra synagogue was so big that they never really emptied it. So for 1,000 years, the Jewish community of Cairo had been storing their papers there, like an enormous storage, or an enormous kind of recycling bin for sacred and non-sacred papers, because not only they put in Bibles and prayer books, but also secular material. And amongst these texts, I found these 150 fragments of alchemy. This one is, so these manuscripts arrived to Cambridge at the end of the 19th century in these like wooden crates. This guy is Solomon Schechter, the one who was responsible for noticing how important this material was and sort of persuading the local rabbi of Cairo to let him take the material. The local rabbi we know that said, take what you like. And Schechter said, I liked it all. So among these fragments, I just show very, very quickly few of them. We have collections of recipes. This one is and most of the fragments that I've found up to now are definitely practical, very operative. They describe operations. They read like a cooking recipe. You have a list of ingredients and then procedures that you have to put these ingredients through in order to attain your scope, which could be the production of gold and silver or the dyeing of metals. They're not like beautiful. They're not in a very nice handwriting. They're really, possibly they are operative notes by artisans, actually like writing them down and jotting them down in their notes while you're operating in a lab, or a sort of lab, in a medieval lab. So this one is a collection of recipes. This one is a bifolio that discusses the ways of refining bodies, the metals, and mentions also the importance of operating with spirits, so volatile substances. So we have these divisions between bodies, metals, and volatile substances. We have another fragment that is again concerned with the nutrition of metals. So we find the use of the so-called decknamen, cover names, which is one of the strategies that the alchemists used for concealing their knowledge. They would use substitute names for expressing their ingredients or the procedures. For instance, here we have the eagle, or cab, that normally means sole ammoniac, but you find like mix the eagle with mercury, and like one that doesn't know this sort of correspondences would ask himself, what shall I do with the eagle? No, it's sole ammoniac. So the fragment here closes with the recipe for the production of silver, and also as a very common topos of alchemical literature. It says, you better know what I have explained here and keep it for yourself. So this is a secrecy of the alchemical message. And I will come back to this very shortly. And this one, again, is another collection of recipes. And it's very interesting because this one mentions also apparatus. Down here you have alembic, the alembic that was also mentioned by Matteo. So by researching these fragments of Jewish origin, I can now say with a certain degree of certainty that although close to no original theoretical book of alchemy written by Jews in the Middle Ages has reached us, alchemical practice, at least, had its space in medieval Jewish culture. And together with their Muslim neighbors, Jews were copying, transcribing, translating, and trying out, possibly practically, these alchemical recipes, following the teachings of their legendary foremother in this field, Mary the Jewess, the one that was mentioned in the UCLA manuscript. Now we go back to that manuscript because it helps me also to explain another feature of medieval Arabo-Islamic and Hebrew alchemy. They appeal the question of secrecy, that's called hermeticism, of esotericism of the alchemical discourse. So our manuscript spends few lines on folio 72 verso dealing with one of the most classical contradictions of alchemical texts. So on the one side, they appeal to secrecy and to the protection of alchemical knowledge from laymen who could use it for materialistic and dangerous goals. But on the other side, first of all, on the other side, we have a text that is explaining us something, but it's saying keep it secret, but in the meantime, we have a text that is explaining something. And also, there are numerous alchemical texts that claim to explain in a plain way the secrets of the art. So here the author says, and I've got the translation, I swear upon my life that I've already unveiled and explained what the ancients have concealed and what the people of the past have expressed through symbols. I'm not afraid of being cursed according to the habit of the people of this art among the sages and the philosophers, because I've explained a lot and I've said amazing things. And the philosophers did this as well, and now this topic is enlightened by the light that dissipates the shadow, if God may he be exalted once. So the dynamic at play here stands on a fine balance between revealing and concealing, or revealing while concealing. Many alchemical works, also in the Latin tradition, claim to lay out in a plain way all the secrets that previous authors have concealed with riddles, decknamen, substitute names, and by scattering alchemical instruction in a random order. So this dynamic of revealing and concealing at the same time carries on. It's not only typical of medieval Arabic or Jewish Hebrew alchemy, because titles of this kind that conceal and reveal at the same time are also very abundant in the Latin tradition. If we take, for example, just an example from the Biblioteca Chimica Curiosa, 1702, 4 volumes by Manger. So we have these sort of titles. Res alchimicorum obscura extraordinaria perspicuitate explanans. The obscure things of alchemy explained with extraordinary perspicuity. Or Oedipus chemicus, obscuriorum terminorum et principiorum chemicorum mysteria aperiens et resolvens. So the chemical Oedipus opening and resolving the mysteries of the obscure terminology and principles of the chemists. And also, liber dictus lux mercuriorum in quo explicator quod in alis libris occultum est. So the book called The Light of Mercury, in which what is hidden in other books is explained. So we have this thing that, okay, so one would think, okay, I read this book, so then I can understand all the books that I haven't understood before because they were all in riddles. Rest assured that the reader is going to be let down by the promised clarity advocated in these titles. Nothing is revealed plainly in this text, since this would contravene one of the basic assumptions of the alchemical production, the secrecy the esotericism of alchemical texts. So it's always a dynamic. I tell you something, but I tell it to you saying that I'm revealing secrets of previous alchemists, but in the meantime, I'm confusing even more the matter. So it's very difficult to go back to the actual substances or operations. And it's very lucky that sometimes texts like the ones that I found in Judeo-Arabic are actually very plain and describe the stages of some operations. The UCLA manuscript, and I go back to it for the last time, is not only rich in theoretical points that have helped me outlining some of the most common themes of medieval Arabic and Judeo-Arabic alchemy, it also preserves practical instructions for alchemical operations to be carried out in the laboratory. As Matteo has mentioned before, the aims of alchemy at its origins were not only transmutational and not purely metallurgical. The preparation of dyes occupies an important part of the early alchemical writings that Matteo has been working on. Traces of a wider scope for alchemy, one that includes the alchemical production of dyes and pigments, are also found in the manuscript we are looking at today, in this manuscript. So here we are on folio 73 verso, and we find few lines that preserve a recipe for the production of artificial purple dye. Here is my translation, no, here's the text, here is my translation. And he, Jabir, said in the Book of the Light, take 1 part of the earth, 1 part of ammoniac salt, and 1 part of water of life. Put all the clear water in a glass vessel and place it on top of another glass vessel as in a knot. Strengthen the connection between the 2 vessels, normally with clay, and put what you have in the hot sun until the earth has dries up and has drunk all the water. Then let it cool down and open the mouth of the vessel and pour over it the tincture, and here it doesn't really explain what it is. Pour over it the tincture for the first time. Then put it in the hot sun as you did for the first time. Act in this way every time, and it will drink the dye completely for 3 times until it becomes dry, if it's summer. If you are instead in winter, treat it with moderate fire like the incubation of a bird. I think that it means the sort of heat that the bird produces when it's sitting on the eggs. You will see it colored in purple. Give praises to God the Exalted for what he has given to you. So here we can clearly see that traditions of dyeing and the artificial production of colors and pigments left their traces in medieval Arabic alchemy as well, also in the Jabirian corpus. Here the key element would be the tincture that is poured upon a mixture of earth, salt ammoniac, and an alcoholic distillate, the water of life, the aquavitae. The tradition of alchemy as represented in this Jabirian manuscript is at its most complete. We have theoretical discussions, reference to past authorities, appeals to secrecy, and practical recipes for metallic and for non-metallic transmutation and the production of dyes, all in one place, all in 2 leaves. I think that my time is more or less up, so I hope I have been able to address few of the topics that are present, both in implicit and explicit way in this manuscript. I'm again thankful to David for choosing this particular 2 pages because, I wanted to go to this one. Yep, these particular 2 pages because they're full of material that can be discussed. And there is even more. I could go on for longer. These 2 pages are an extremely rich starting point for general considerations on theoretical principles and practical endeavors that are typical of medieval Arabo-Islamic alchemy. The same theoretical assumptions will then be passed on to the Western Latin tradition and will be transmitted into vernacular languages in Europe. One of my aims today was also to show that reading through a page of a medieval alchemical treatise requires opening up to a tradition that encompasses centuries of developments and embraces different cultures: Greek, Syriac, Arabic, Hebrew, Judeo-Arabic, Latin, and vernacular. Borrowing another theme that I have not been able to touch upon today, and of course is mentioned in those 2 pages, these 2 manuscript leaves are like a microcosm of medieval alchemy. connecting us to the macrocosm of ancient and medieval alchemical knowledge through a number of themes, correspondences, parallelisms, and suggestions. Thank you.
I told you my friends were smart. And now you know why we're all such close friends, because there's only 5 other people in the world. We all get each other's jokes. There's no other people to talk to. Will you take a couple of questions? 1 or 2?
Thank you so much. This was fascinating. I have a question about these 2 pages, if you just, on the slide before, without the pictures of all the main characters. If you look on the right side, there are blank spaces. Are they reserved for secret concepts? What are the blank spaces in the pages? They're reminiscent of the Hebrew manuscripts, and I'm curious about it. The blank spaces that you see, the white paper showing through, as if it's reserved for concept. What do those represent?
These I really think is just a graphical, like a mise en page situation, because the same sort of spaces like this, we find them at the beginning of the different treatises. And here is switching to a different topic. Okay. So I don't think that they have a specific like this. Okay. There's like a paragraph presentation.
Thank you. I was interested in your discussion of secrecy, and you suggested that the alchemists wanted to protect their secrets from materialistic laymen who might exploit it, and that implies that they had a high-minded purpose or group identity that had a different spiritual, perhaps, dimension. Can you talk about who they were compared to these people they were trying to protect the secrets from?
So, it seems clear that when alchemical authors are talking about themselves, of course, they tend to beautify their aim. It's not only the production of gold for merely producing richness, but, for instance, the anecdote that I started with of Khalid ibn Yazid, yes, of course, he wants to produce gold, but not really for himself. He's a prince already. He wants to produce gold for his friends and for other intellectuals so that they could have enough money to carry out their studies without having to go and petition the sultans, to knock at the power, like a kind of a perpetual research grant. On the other side, like in written text, like what even in later Latin alchemy, what we have written is the record of very good-willing people, good-willing alchemists. What we know from not literary text or not alchemical text, from trials, records, mostly after the Islamic period, from trials, is that there were around lots of actually fraudulent alchemists. So the idea of these, let's say, more intellectual alchemists, these writer or alchemical books, is to detach themselves and separate themselves from this fraudulent sort of entertainers, alchemists, like doctors of magic and medicine and so on. For the Jewish people, it's particularly interesting because one of the few jobs that they were allowed to perform, mostly in Europe, was to exchange money. And being associated with contrafeiters was a very bad thing for a money exchanger. So there is always this clear separation. Okay, I write it, but I write it for the sages and for those who will use these secrets and will understand these secrets because they are already part of an elite for good purposes.
So if I could ask a last question. I mean, something that sort of all of us have been bouncing around for years is kind of the development of this artistic metaphor, like the symbolic language that's being used. And from both your talks, you see in the manuscripts that when it comes to symbols, planets, and just I mean, a lot of it is just shorthand. It's really not keeping it a secret. It's just easier to make a sign for Mercury than write it out in whether it's Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, etc. And in Arabic manuscripts, you don't really get this sort of metaphorical imagery. You might, like in Zosimus, you get a few black birds, white birds, red birds, but it's, I mean, generally they're just laying out, like, here's the apparatus. So do you think that sort of the artistic metaphor that you get in the European tradition, the Chinese tradition, like, is it coming out of an Arabic literary tradition? I mean, like you say, they're saying secrets, but they're just sitting there and writing out for you what every once in a while, like, take the eagle and mix it with quicksilver, but none of it's that secret. Yep. So where's the art coming out of? I mean, besides the technical stuff we see. So
yes, but there's a clear increase in alchemical imagery and drawings when we move towards the Latin world. These may also be connected with the fact that alchemy becomes suspicious in the eyes of the church at a certain point in the Middle Ages. I don't remember exactly the date when alchemy gets banned in the Latin world, anyone? And so at that point, the concealment of alchemical secrets under artistic representations in manuscripts that are not really easily decipherable as instruction for making gold or silver can be a useful tool. It becomes also a fashion at a certain point in the Latin world. And it assures also the circulation of some of these manuscripts. Beautiful imagery, like the ones you find in the Ripley scroll, becomes also a mean for attracting the fundings from patrons. So an alchemist would produce a lavishly colorful and illustrated book to donate to a patron, and the patron in exchange would allow him to work as a physician, maybe as an alchemy in his own laboratory. So the introduction of very nice imagery may also be related, I think, to a question of patronage. The fact that some copies of this book were actually donated to possible patrons for your enterprise. Like in the Arabic works I've been working on, we have a very, very simple imagery. Sometimes they are a bit embarrassed in how to describe an apparatus, so they also draw a little shape for making it clearer, but it doesn't have an artistic or, an artistic purpose.
Well, maybe something we'll come back to at the end of the day. There's one other thing that I forgot to mention that I found out that last night, that Gabriele has just received, you'll be visiting assistant research professor at Johns Hopkins for the next couple of years. So at least I can just commute to Baltimore, have some crab and see you. But congratulations on it.